Good day, everyone, and welcome back to the second session of the 16th Asia Pacific Sociological Association Conference. This session is broadcasted live via the Facebook page APSA Conference 2021 as seen on your screen. So it's at the bottom of the PowerPoint. Again, the Facebook page is APSA Conference 2021. So please be guided by the house rules for today's session. All guests and participants are automatically muted upon entry. The ceremony will be recorded for documentation purposes. For panelists, please keep your video off and your microphone muted, especially if it's not your turn to speak. And you will be hearing my voice or Professor Emiko's voice when you only have 3 minutes left. And for attendees, please send your questions through the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen so that the session chairs can note this and erase it during our open forum. For those who are attending through the Facebook live stream, please send your questions through the comment section below the live stream. So this session is entitled A Roundtable Discussion on Asian Families and Intimacies Toward the Development of Asian Collaboration, and this will be moderated by Professor Ochiai Emiko. Professor Emiko is a professor of sociology at Kyoto University, Japan. May I now give the floor to Professor Emiko.
Thank you very much, Patty, for your kind introduction. I am Emiko Ochiai, a sociologist from Japan. I belong to Kyoto University. It is a great honor and pleasure for me to have this opportunity to hold this panel in the meeting of APSA, Asian Pacific Sociological Association meeting. This session is about the outcome of our project called Asian Families and Intimacies. We recently published these books, 4-volume set from Sage, India. This is the outcome of our 13 years collaboration. We started this project in 2009, 8 or 9. Could you turn to the next slide? This is the starting point of our project. We are worried about a way of Asian people's knowledge production on other Asian societies. Basically, we learn about other Asian societies through English literature, or German or French, usually Western literature. Very few people in Asia can read the languages of neighboring countries in Asia. So we have to go through the Western academia to learn about other Asian societies. So of course, each Asian country has their own academia. So they produce their knowledge about their own country. But it is difficult to learn from our neighbors' academic activities directly. So please turn to the next slide. We decided to construct a new form of communication within Asia to learn about Asian societies directly from our neighbors. So this just, this way. For doing this, we started collaboration this way. Next slide, please. We constructed a group called KICAS, Kyoto International Consortium for Asian Studies. It was established in 2014. You can see the faces of today's presentators in this photo. So the aim of this group was to construct the foundations for intellectual collaborations in Asia. Next slide, please. We planned 3 layers of projects. The first layer is called Asian Intellectual Heritage, to collect most important academic works from Asian societies and translate them into English or any languages to share. On the top of it, the second project, which is called Comparative Asian Survey, was conducted. The aim of this project is construct a comparable database, data sets within Asia. And on the top of these 2 layers, we can conduct true research collaboration on various topics. This is the structure of the huge project we've been conducting. Next, please. So for constructing Asian studies in the 21st century, we have to change the global mode of knowledge production to deconstruct the binaries between the West and the East, and to reject Orientalism, and to construct Asia from Asian perspectives. And we need to build a common intellectual platform for Asian collaboration. This is what we had in our mind. Next slide, please. And the very basis of the 3 layers, we conducted this Asian Intellectual Heritage Project to collect, translate, disseminate key texts of Asian academic heritage, especially those originally written in local languages from insiders' perspective, without the mediation and distortion by going through European and North American academic circuits. And next, please. And this is the outcome of our project. It's called Asian Families and Intimacies. So this is the first project conducted under the larger name of Asian Intellectual Heritage. But so far we have only produced this result, only about Asian families and intimacies. So I really hope that the people in the audience will follow us to produce the next book series on different topics. We decided to start from families and intimacies because we thought families have been considered to be the basic unit in many Asian societies. And we are so keen about the changes happening to our families. So we decided to start our heritage project from families and intimacies. Next, please. And the books, Asian Families and Intimacies, were edited by these people, International Editorial Committee. As you see, we have scholars from 9 societies in Asia. And some of them are today's presentators. And next, please. And our books have 6 parts: family ideology, patriarchy, sexuality, marriage, care regimes, and gender, edited by these scholars. You can see the name of Caroline Soblicia from the Philippines. And next, please. Sorry. After reading the 56 chapters we collected, I was a bit lost because of the diversity of the chapters, the contents. So I spent time to understand the structures behind these 56 chapters. And so this is my trial to understand the basic structures in Asia. I hope to share it with you. I think it's important to understand Asia as multi-layered diversity. At the very basis, kinship structure exists. There are different kinship structures like patrilineality, bilaterality, matrilineality, and among them, patrilineality and bilaterality are the 2 major structures. So we can divide Asia into 2 areas, 2 regions, patrilineal Asia and bilateral Asia. This basic difference is still working now. Next slide, please. And in history, what happened was the civilizations by the 3 civilizations, Chinese, Indian, and Islamic one. Those civilizations changed the societies around them. So those civilizations in patrilineal Asia changed the societies in bilateral Asia. It happened in Southeast Asia. I understand Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Vietnam, Southeast Asian societies. If we look at its basic structure, kinship, and of course, Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia. But they received the influence from different civilizations in history, and they transformed to some extent. This is the history of Asian families and intimacies and gender. Next, please. And after that, modernization occurred. It is a kind of civilization, but it has some universal effect because of its because it covers the whole globe. So all the societies are influenced by modernization, but the influence is a bit different by the areas of the societies. Okay, so this is the picture I have in my mind to read the chapters in these volumes. So I will give the chances to talk about their own views to our co-editors. Thank you very much. This is the end of my introduction. So next, I ask Professor Patricia Uberoy to talk about her views on this project. Her title is Asian Sexualities in a Comparative Perspective, Some Reflections. Please start.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And it's a great pleasure to be here, to see some old friends, some new friends, and to regenerate the enthusiasm that this project has had since over a decade, since 2009. Now, let me begin with an outline of what I'm going to say. I will first talk about what provoked me to raise my hand and say, yes, I would like to edit the volume on Asian sexualities and be part of this project. The second is something to do more general, to do with what I see to be a lack of, in Indian sociology and social anthropology. You may realize that in India, we tend to conflate, not everyone, but many people tend to conflate these two disciplinary orientations. Then I will look at the challenges of the putting together just 10 readings to summate three or more, so many civilizations actually, and across history. Then I will explain the structure of the order of texts as I have made it, basically into two parts, one called Reinterpreting Sexual Histories, and the second called Contemporary Sexualities, Attitudes and Behavior. And finally, I will share some concluding thoughts with you. And perhaps if there is time, Emiko, may I ask you to keep reminding me of the time when there are just 2 minutes left to talk about particular papers if there and their meaning for me if there is time. Now, Patty, could you go to the next slide? Now, I call this the provocation to my ordering of the papers on sexuality or sexualities, and that has already been described so ably by Emiko, who Professor Ochiai, who was the prime mover of this particular project, and it's one which I completely endorse, I must say, from my experience, both as someone who has studied China. My original training was in Chinese studies and East Asian studies, and then my long-term professional residence in India, and a rather different point of view. And that coming from a training in Oriental studies, so-called in those days, now called Asian studies in Australia. Now, so I fully endorse what she said, that there does seem to be a need to construct Asia from an Asian perspective, that is from the insider's perspective, and directly and without the mediation of European and North American academic circuits. Of course, we'll soon notice one problem with that Asian social scientists, particularly those who are part of the international circuits of their disciplines, social science disciplines, they are already, as it were, speaking two languages. The one, if you like, from their own perspective or the Asian perspective, but equally likely from a global disciplinary perspective. And lastly, I do believe in the translation and dissemination of textual materials as being a very, very important and enlightening task that has been taken up here and that must continue from in all ways. What is interesting here is we're all familiar with various volumes from famous Orientalist publishers like Brill, which do translations, say, of Chinese or Japanese or other Asian languages and civilizations, but putting them side by side within a set of volumes is something new. It's very exciting, and the papers talk to each other across these country-specific studies. Next slide, please, Patty. Now, there was one other thing that has driven me all the time in this, and that is an acknowledgement of the insularity of Indian sociology and social anthropology. That is that there's a sort of typically Indian sociology and social anthropology, as they are taught and understood and are modern disciplines within the university system, they consist of the application of Western social science to an understanding of what is called the Indian reality. And unfortunately, in the social science world in India, there's absolutely minimal interest in other societies and cultures, in the neighborhood even, in the region, and elsewhere. If there is any comparative point of view, it is looking at India or South Asia vis-a-vis the West, looking at our histories, our societies, our cultures vis-a-vis the West, and no very, very little done on other Asian studies, even under the name of area studies, so-called, which is extremely limp and weak in the Indian educational system. So I think Asian Families and Intimacies as a project asserts the value of comparativism, exploring similarities and differences in the Asian region, structures and processes, I might underline, outside a supposed universal linear evolutionist framework. I do believe it's an important task to undertake and salute the Kyoto Project for this. Next, please. Now, as I said, I had undertaken, I'd put up my hand actually to undertake the part of the volume on sexuality. It's called sexuality, but I fully believe that it must be sexualities in the plural. And I had no sooner put up my hand and begun reading the translations which were coming in from all over, that I realized that I had undertaken a completely impossible task. Everyone else, all the other part editors must have felt the same once they rolled up their sleeves. And one was able to end up here with just, I might say, 10 papers, in the case of this part on sexuality, from only 7 Asian countries: India, Japan, Korea, Thailand, mainland China, Philippines, Indonesia. And with fundamental differences between the countries, as Professor Ochio has just outlined, between their kinship systems, which must be related to sexualities, that is patrilineal, lineal, matrilineal, bilateral in different emphases, in their associated what are called procreative ideologies, in household types, in rules of inheritance and residence, in modes of production and ecologies, in ethnicities and so on. Yet, these same societies were geographically connected, interconnected through millennia in ways in which our national boundaries and borders sometimes prevent us seeing in the round. Similarly, again, as Professor Ochiai has insisted, each of these countries or societies has been similarly imbricated in various varying degrees in the historical processes to which have been given the names of Confucianization, Sanskritization, of course, under the regime of colonization, Westernization or modernization, Islamization, and latterly globalization. And these processes inflect and speak through sexual ideologies and practices as empirically studied on the ground. Next, Patty. Now, as I began, I found that that the papers fell into two sections. And I must say that in the final rendering of this part, they are a bit uneven. I have 6 papers in one, with the 6th sort of half belonging in the second part, and 4 papers in the other. And the first theme is, I've called it reinterpreting sexual histories. In all the societies concerned, a major focus of academic writing in the Asian region, as in the West, I have to outline, or as from different political and disciplinary perspectives, such as feminism, there has been a great emphasis on the creation and reinterpretation of histories of sexuality from varying perspectives. They might be nationalist, reformist, looking for social reform, communitarian, feminist, Marxist, LGBT, and so on. This is an ongoing process. It's not ended, it's still going. But the historical vision and the reworking of historical visions is very important. I should say here that once I had attended a conference on Chinese social historians, particularly devoted to family and kinship. And coming from South Asia, I was absolutely amazed. This was about the year 2001, I think, in Tianjin. And I was completely amazed that there were over 300 Chinese social historians all engaged in this. In South Asia, you could count social historians interested in family, kinship, sexualities, etc., really on the fingers of one hand. Now, I also note here that in the rewriting of history, sexual histories in particular, South Asian writings have been particularly focused on the impact of British colonialism. That's not unnatural. The impact was, this was a colonial society. And the consequent demand in reaction to the colonial regime for the demand for social reform of customary practices in the domain of kinship and sexuality, those practices that were deemed primitive or uncivilized in the light of British and European Christian norms and practices. Instead institute, or from the perspective of the mandate of a particular regime of incest taboos, like who you can marry, who you can have sex with, and so on, of the assumption of heterosexual normativity in the colonial period, the emphasis on the superiority of monogamy, and the production of an evolutionary scheme of the development of human societies from primitive times to modernity. Now, in the first part on reinterpreting sexual histories, there are 6 essays which exemplify the ongoing interrogation and interpretation of normative texts and historical materials in different cultural and national settings and from different disciplinary standpoints. In doing so, the essays not only correct or rebalance the specific historical record, so to speak, but also interrogate prevailing assumptions of global social science. I might point to some of those if I have a chance in my concluding remarks. There are a lot of things that one sees as assumptions one makes in the light of contemporary social science, to which these texts actually talk and which contradict these assumptions in surprising ways. Next, please, Patty. Now, I'll just refer here briefly to some of the texts here in this section, and you will get a sense of what they might be about. Now, the first one, which I opened with, it's a text that I really love and treasure by the Indian feminist historian, she's a historian of ancient India, Kumkum Roy, on Vatsyayana's Kama Sutra. Now, everyone in the audience will know that when you talk about sexuality, this particular text comes to mind. This article goes on to look at its English translation by the famous British adventurer, spy, and Orientalist Richard Burton, and then its rendition in different contemporary media, including in potboiler Bollywood films. I may have some more to say on this text in the concluding remarks, but just as a preliminary, I would only say that works on the sexual life of this civilization or this country and that one, and particularly of Orientalist or primitive or non-European societies, are very much a part of 19th and 20th century popular and literate culture and the history of our discipline, sociology. The second one, which I would also like to talk about in the end, if I get time, is Ujie Mikito's account of institutionalized male homosexuality, surprisingly, as an intrinsic feature of the warrior samurai class in pre-modern Japan. This is counter-intuitional from the point of view of contemporary writings on LGBT and homosexuality. The third one is by Korean social historian Jung-E Jung, who discusses the regulation of concubinage in late Joseon, Korea. Very interesting paper, because concubinage was always felt to be an expression of, if you like, sexual, sexuality, and very much against the monogamous ideas of modernity. This particular paper takes a very new stance. Next, please. Now, one important thing that I have seen very strongly represented in South Asian feminist and social historical writings on this field is the recourse not only to classical texts like the Sanskrit Kama Sutra, but to looking at folklore. And and looking at folklore as expressing often quite contradictory norms, values, and practices. Now, this particular paper, and I believe that Tanis is going to talk to that later on, is about the folklore of a practice called night calling, which is, well, if you like, premarital sexual encounters, completely different from the normal picture of regulated Japanese sexuality. The third one is very interesting and is one of a multiplicity of papers by Indian feminists and other social historians. This is by Professor Veena Oldenburg on the lifestyles of the famous courtesans of Lucknow, arguing against the prevailing understandings of the role of the courtesans as either victims or prostitutes. Victims because they were assumed to have been trafficked, or prostitutes because they also engaged in very often, or typically perhaps, in sexual relations with their patrons. And this is very important because the group that she was referring to, the courtesans, were actually custodians of classical arts, of music, singing, and dance, well trained in these. She begins her paper by pointing out that the idea of them as only victims is perhaps a little overdone in its contemporary perspective, because although some of them may have led very unfortunate lives or be trafficked and so on, they were actually major property holders in the city of Lucknow. They moved in high society. Their voices and their dance forms were valued. They were famous, not entirely of good reputation, but they were famous women of repute. So after this comes
2 more minutes, please.
Sorry?
2 more minutes.
Okay, then I'll have to hurry up. And the fire I can also add more later. This was Tanas Wongyanava's decoding of Thai sexual manuals and the pioneering study of the science of sexology in 20th century Thailand. Next, please. Now, much of the people may perhaps see that I was much more interested in these multiple decodings of the historical records in Asia. But of course, one had to address contemporary attitudes and behaviors. Much of the research on this, social research, is conducted under state auspices, or more importantly, under the auspices of international agencies, and directed towards policy formation in specific, supposedly problem areas. The favored methodologies here are survey research and statistical analysis, focused by things like focus group, supplemented by focus group discussions, etc. Now, the two areas of research, not unsurprisingly, have been population management and the control of sexually transmitted infections. And these are often conceived and conducted as country studies within broader comparative projects, but I should add, comparative projects generated usually by global agencies and so on. Increasingly, one does see, however, writings by members or advocates on behalf of sexual minorities. Now, could I have the next slide, please? I think I can't do more than just flag what we have here. The pioneer Chinese family sociologist, Professor Xuan Xi's attitudinal study of sexual attitudes of male and female unmarried youth in Chengdu and Shanghai at the turn of the 21st century. A very important breaking point in Chinese contemporary history. A fascinating analysis by Filipino writer Roland Tolentino on the Filipino nightclub macho dancer, both hypermasculine and feminized by nature of his class. Then we have from Indonesia, a first-person narrative by an LGBT activist on the silent secret of her lesbian identity, and finally, a culturally inflected account of something that shouldn't be missed from a volume on sexuality, a paper on the law of rape as amended in India and putting sexual violence on the front stage. Now I must wind up. Last slide, please. So individually, I'd like to say these translated texts invite comparison and contrast between and among different Asian societies, historically and in the present. And they also, in different ways, call into questions the theoretical assumptions of global sexuality studies refracted from Western settings into and onto Asia. I would like to highlight several of these, but perhaps I did want to mention the study, or Ujie's study, of Nanshoku homosexuality, male homosexuality, and the related to the Bushido culture. So, as I would say, new culture questions for Asian and global social science emerge in fascinating ways from the frontiers of history and from these multiple translations. Not only the part on sexuality, but all the other parts also have much to learn, provide much to learn in this field. I'm very sorry that I seem to have probably overstepped my time a little. And in the background, my husband is bearing witness to the levels of pollution in India at this moment. So I should definitely mute him and myself and turn off our audio.
Thank you very much, Professor Ubeloy, for your thorough presentation about sexualities in Asia. Then next, may I ask Professor Tanet Wanyanawa to speak on night crawling in Japan and Thailand. Tanet, please.
Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I shall start now. Patrilineality needs to know who is the father of the babies. Therefore, female sexuality has to be under control by male. Line of descendant to father from well to bloodline could be assured. Being a virtuous woman means that her sexual intercourse is only limited within the sphere of matrimony. Sex within the bastion of marriage institution has been well accepted product of Christianity, especially with the advent of the bourgeois powers and battles under modernity and colonialism. I pronounce you husband and wife, and now you may kiss the bride, show the authority of the Christian priests who allow male and female to have sex when and where. Before and after World War II, around 1930 to 1950, as westernization proceeded, sexology in Thailand also played an important role for implanting the idea of confinement of sexual practice within the sphere of marriage institution. Matrilineality is widely known in Southeast Asia, for example, Minangkabau in Indonesia, Musu in Yunnan. If the modern boundary of the nation state and geography are forgotten, Yunnan will also be regarded as a part of the Southeast Asia. Musu matrilineality is the opposite end of the Chinese Han patrilineality. For patrilineality way of life, matrilineal society gives too much sexual freedom to women. Therefore, woman is so carefree. When women get pregnant, the baby belongs to the mother and her family. As Lila Dubé, the lately known female and Indian anthropologist, stated, matrilineality and patrilineality make gender relations in South and Southeast Asia so different. Matrilocal and bilaterality were the practice of the Siamese peasant. Siamese, I mean the Thailand before 1939, around 38, 39, around that time, before we changed the name to Thailand. Okay, so I use Siamese. The Thai word for groom is Chao Bao. It literally means head of the servant. Bao is the word for servant. Male-in-law had to become the labor force for his wife's household or the property. For example, land and asset belong to the woman family, though the groom are also supposed to pay the bride price as well. Therefore, the labor of the son-in-law has to show its power regardless of activity. Sexual performance is included. He had to make sure that his wife is happy in every aspect. Before the decade of 1780s, it was easy for a wife to file a divorce, and that made the Siamese king around the end of the 18th century puzzle with the practice. Before it was divided by the king toward the end of the 18th century. It's not a matter of whether the husband was a good husband or not. As long as his wife wanted to have a new man, she initiated a divorce. The traditional law allowed divorce to happen as long as wife intended to do so. Undoubtedly, either Catholicism or Protestant shunned this practice. Siamese traditional peasant society, however, did not want to have the law of the state to interfere in their life. Staying away from the state and the elite as much as possible was the way. Expulsion from her premise was much easier than relying legal means. Her husband had to leave the house so that the new man could move in under the matrilocal, as well as all the property belonged to the woman. Her ex-husband had to move out. Husband therefore has to make sure that his wife was happy. Sexual performance is one of the key. Some husband therefore need sexual aid attached to his penis, so that's the enhancement of sexual performance guarantee. This is not only for his machismo, but also making sure that his future as a husband will last long. Otherwise, his future could be so fragile. This was a Siamese peasant way of life, but not the elites, where patrilineality and practilocal were the rule. Bilateralism in Siam has been abolished under the absolute monarchy in the early 20th century. Once patrilineality, which used to be the conduct of the elites, become the norm of the society. The control of female sexuality has to be enforced even more. Where male surname become compulsory, the power of the male line of descendant is established. The state, as one of the institutions of the elites, enforced the practice under the name of the father in the law. As the process of nation building after 1930s had begun, male power became even more eminent. There are at least three major forces that make patrilineality become one of the hegemonic forces: the Thai elite itself, the westernization and Christianization through modernization process, and the Chinese way of life and thought to the influx of Chinese immigrants. As patrilineality need to regulate sexual intercourse, premarital sex is unacceptable because the practice is in the hand of the beholder, whose sexual desire could be insatiable. In a peasant society, premarital sex takes place outside matrimony and bed. Outdoor sex has been part of the human evolution. Among in the cornfield, these engraving works of Rembrandt, the Dutch painter, show outdoor sex, where the monk is on the top. Festival and carnival around the young peasant to have outdoor sex occur in various parts of the world, for example, even Europe under the Christian rule. In terms of evolution, having outdoor sex was quite dangerous. From animal to insect, they could be too fatal during the time of joint movement, let alone the question of decency later on. The representation of Jusong tend to be omnipresent in Asian culture. From the Japanese chonga and Indian temple to Siamese mural painting, all of them portray this carnal pressure in public space. Peasant way of life shows sexual pressure from dance to festival. Festival is a time for the expression of sexual pressure that which could be manifest in all forms. Human sexuality does not need season. Day or night do not count. Of course, nighttime is preferable. The Japanese term yaobai or night calling indicate the way of life of the peasant. In line with the practice of Japanese yobai or night calling, the night calling of the central plain of Thailand among the peasants also appear in the well-known Thai literature, Kun Chang Kun Pan. Many scenes of Kun Chang Kun Pan were censored by Thai elites until the late 1990s. The full version was released due to the 1997 constitution, which is completely terminated by the coup d'etat. That enforced the National Library to release the full version. Nonetheless, when Thai scholars wanted to rank 100 Thai literature that Thai people should read, there was no Kun Chang Kun Pan on the list. It's too public, it's too obscene. One of the scenes in Kun Chang Kun Pan took place when the main character was still young. The main male character was madly in love with the girl when he was a Buddhist novice. The scene of the night crawling that protests sex scene is one of the famous scenes when the young novice sneaks into young girl's room to have sex with her at night. After showing his sexual design toward her while they were in the cotton field during the day. Night calling was known as kunha, or climbing up. In the central plain of Thailand, the peasant way of marriage appears in various forms. The brutal one was forced by force. The second one was climbing up or making up an appointment with the woman to have sex with her. The third one is, of course, elopement. Once the baby was born, the couple would return to the family so that the pardon would be granted by the parents. At the end, the couple could share the inheritance. Getting married properly was too expensive for the Siamese peasant, especially when the bride parents demand too much bride price. Proper time of having sex under the name of the age of consent, which was tightening around the latter half of the 19th century in Europe, was too alien for Siamese peasants. In the work of Akamatsu Keisuke, in this volume, the volume that Oberoi edited under the chapter of the Four Laws of the Night Call, probably you have heard. This is what I quote. In brothel, there was an official standard that one had to be 15 to become prostitute. But it was something decided by officialdom, and the village ignored this sort of stupid idea. If the girl had that period, then 12 or 13 was old enough for yobai, according to some village. Though there were another that would not let the girl participate, even if they were as old as 15 or 16, if their pubic hair was not fully grown. Climbing up was absolutely unacceptable for the Thai elite, where female virginity has to be guarded at all costs to ensure that male line of this descendant. However, laws always encounter the exception. In 1886, when the princess named Ying Yawarak was around 34 years old, she had sex with a young monk whose name was Do. He met the princess during the time of Buddhist chant in the Paris. The young monk sneaked into the Paris to have sex with her at night. Eventually, she got pregnant. She tried so hard to hide her pregnancy by binding her belly and body with the long cord. But nature could not be controlled. When the baby was delivered, her secret was turned into the scandal of the Siamese court. While she was demoted and lost the title of princess, the young monk was executed. Undoubtedly, the relationship between the Buddhist monk, and the girl is forbidden. Touching and contacting physically are not allowed. The forbidden relationship is a kind of a curse, yet it is the practice in everyday life, similarly to what has happened in the Catholic Church. Everyone seemed to follow the practice of don't ask, don't tell. Nonetheless, the story spread like fire, from the elite to the commoner. The relationship between princess and the monk was not an affair to remember. The official image of the nation state For the official image of the nation state, such kind of sexual practice has to be excluded from national memory. For the conclusion, I will quote Keisuke, who wrote at the end of this chapter. If you are going to deny things which are not in conformity with your ethics and political idea, you need to remove all trace of phenomenon. Yanakita, who was a bureaucrat in the Ministry of Agriculture and Commerce, ignored all sexual customs, starting with Yobai, presumably because his ethic and political idea did not allow him to admit their existence. However, my basic instinct is that things that are should be seen just as they are. And the more we examine things just as they are, the more we see that reality is diverse and take many forms. Maybe diversity, in the court, maybe diversity is too dangerous for the society, where homogenization and harmonies are required, especially within the realm of the nation state. Thank you very much. I finished my talk. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Tanet. You talked about similarities between Japan and Thailand in terms of sexuality. So now we have finished two presentations about sexuality. Then let's move on to marriage formation by Professor Nguyen Hu Minh from Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences. Then Professor Minh, please.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Professor Emiko Ochai. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank you very much, organizer, to have me here as a presenter to talk something about one volume I was editor. That is for marriage formation. So as introduced briefly by Professor Emiko Ochai, in this volume, I will talk about like some chapter from different country, talk about like some different aspect related to like marriage formation. So as you can see that in the world, including in Asia, there are dramatic changes in marriage formation. For example, like decreasing trend in marriage rate and increasing as marriage and cohabitation rate and individual freedom in the selection of a mate. Please move to the next. Okay. And there are some different way of explanation. For example, like the factor can explain for the change of marriage pattern. We can see like for the availability, the feasibility, and the desirability of marriage, as suggested by Dixon sociological framework, or the role of some modernization factor not related to industrialization and urbanization process. And also from cultural approach, we also can see the role of traditional custom and norm and religion and the effect of state policy, etc. However, the direction, next please, direction of each marriage aspect may differ from one culture to the next. And the important factor shaping marriage pattern also vary depending on the society and the study. So it is very important to clarify in each particular context what factors have a strong effect on marriage pattern. So in this volume, we present 8 chapters written by the author in the period in 1999 to 2009 that refer to the various aspects of marriage formation. As I would like to emphasize, that is, I focus only one aspect of marriage, that pattern, that is marriage formation. So here we can see like the various aspects of marriage formation in each country and illustrate the richness of type of marriage and impact factor. And in my presentation, I will emphasize the main point, main important idea from each chapter about the marriage formation. And very luckily that some author of the volume also present here in this session. For example, like Professor Patricia Broy. And you can see that like the number of chapter, 8 chapter, is quite long compared to the rather broad range of topic. Also compared to the number of countries in the region. So here we can select only some paper reflect different dimensions and complement each other on marriage issue. Next, please. The first chapter by Chai Posista, Thailand, from Thailand, mentioned about the change of marriage pattern in Thailand in 3 particular aspects, that is later marriage, decreasing prevalence of marriage, and the change of traditional form of marriage, especially emerge slowly a kind of cohabitation. And this chapter also shows the role of some factor of modernization theory. For example, like the role of the urban area of like a modern occupation and for young people. For example, like a higher marital age in city, and those whose occupation require them to achieve certain level of knowledge and skill married later than self-employed person, and higher rate of cohabitation among young urban people. Next, please. The chapter 2 by Yamada Masahiro so very interesting phenomenon in Japan, and also we can refer to other countries too. That is the increasing number of unmarried people cohabiting with their parents in Japan, that we can call like a parasite syndrome. And the 2 main arguments to explain for this new phenomenon, that is due to the decreasing number of marriage and difficult for parasite syndrome to get married, because they are very satisfied with their life before getting married. The next, please. The chapter 3 by Nguyễn Minh focus on the first marriage in the Red River Delta, that is in the north of Vietnam, during the 5 decades up to 1995 for both sexes, female and male. And that is interesting in this study. That is show the new explanation for change in the marriage age. That is in addition to very important role of education, urbanization, and occupation outside agriculture. That is a crucial significance, the role of wartime and national policy, because these factor that was not so much in other study. And from the analysis, the author also expected that as marriage in the Red River Delta will continue to increase, but at a slower rate compared to earlier decade. And chapter 4, and next please, by Ravinder Kaur, they examine the social outcome of the strong son preference characteristic of Indian patrilineal kinship system. And for example, in rural area, 1 in 5 men will be unable to marry in accordance with the customary norms of the region and their respective community. For example, for men from poorer family, for lower birth order men, and for men seeking to make secondary marriage. And this chapter provided an excellent and succinct account of variety of material transactions typically associated with marriage arrangement in India. Next, please. Lê Bạch Dương and his colleague in chapter 5 emphasize the role of poverty and gender imbalance in marriage formation in terms of transnational marriage. and they examine the wider social meanings of the sharp and unprecedented increase of Vietnamese women migrating to marry men from Taiwan and South Korea since the late 1990s. And they place commercially arranged transnational marriage in the social field formed by interaction between household, market, and state. In chapter 6 by Su An Quy, identify the most important mate selection preferences in China during the last half of the 20th century. And it is found out that even though Chinese people still value the stability and longevity of marriage, more attention to socio-economic and practical conditions starting in the late 1980s, and young people and higher education pay more attention to their potential mate, economic and social status, and the more the living environment modernized, the more attention is given to romantic love. Next, please. In chapter 7 by Zhu Guoxiu, also focus on China marriage pattern, and this chapter analyzed the changing practice of marriage payment since 1940 in a town in China, and it is a review that escalating payments mean a rise in both individualism and conjugality. And as a kind of traditional cultural and social recourse, marriage payments tend to be utilized to pursue the equilibrium of power in opponent relationship by the bride's family. Next, please. The last chapter in my volume, that is chapter 8 by Patricia Ubroy, who just gave presentation few minutes ago. In this chapter, Patricia recognized a global phenomenon, that of bridal magazine in an Indian context. And following the magazine Bride and Home, this chapter identifies 3 areas of reader anxiety and concern, which the magazine clearly failed to satisfy. That is how to deal with in-laws, especially in the context of virulent marriage, and the initiation of consequent sexuality, given the cultural premium on virginity, and the politics of gift giving in its overlap with the dowry system. So a chapter in this volume shows a colorful picture of the diversity and changes of marriage pattern in Asia within the overarching context of globalization today. And this also illustrates the explanation of different theory of marriage pattern. And this chapter suggested further issues such as the role of migration, communication, or the interwined impact of government policy and modernization factor discussed earlier. And this issue, even though was a study in some other study, but given the frame of the book, we could not bring this into the book. So that is we can discuss later, and I hope you can find out more about this finding by reading directly to the chapter. And some author who joined this session today also can give some idea or explanation about the chapter. Okay, so that is very brief my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Min. Well, I have something to talk to the audience. You might have some questions to each presentators, but please wait for a while. You have enough time in the discussion at the end of the session. So may I ask Patty, are you asking the audience to write questions or comments in chat box?
Yes.
Okay. So can they do that now?
Yes, they have access to the chat box.
Okay. So so if you have any questions or comments, please write in the chat box. Then we will continue. The next one is Professor Nagasaka Itaru. You might have noticed we use the name order of Asian names, the names of presentators, yeah, in the order of their society. So Nagasaka is his surname. Okay, so Itaru, please, he will talk about migration, family, and gender views from Asia. Please.
Thank you very much for your introduction, Emiko Sensei. Today, I'd like to talk about migrations, issue of the migrations. Some chapters touched on the issue of the migration in that volumes we are introducing. So I like to focus on this particular topic. Next slide, please. Okay, since the 2000s, the notion of the transnational family has received scholarly attention as a result of the growing awareness of the international division of reproductive labor or global care chains. International migration of mothers and their ties with their family members who are left behind have become an important subject of scientific research. The literature on the transnational motherhood highlighted the emotional hardships faced by the migration mothers and by their children left behind. These studies have revealed that many of these hardships are caused by the prevailing gap between the homeland mothering norms that prioritize the face-to-face care by mothers and migrants' actual long-distance mothering practices. These studies then questioned how migrant mothers have grappled with such emotional hardships. For example, Hondagnu Sotelo and Avila, in their pioneering work, have detailed the emotional suffering of Latina mothers employed as domestic workers in the US, whose children were taken care in their homeland. They have demonstrated how these mothers who cannot pursue conventional mothering roles due to the separation from their children have redefined the motherhood by emphasizing their emotional ties through regular communication and remittances. Next slide, please. A lot of work has been done on the issues associated with the effects of the migration to family. However, there remain issues that are largely unexplored. First, because of the growing awareness of the increase of the migrant mothers under the global care chains, the existing literature has focused on transnational mothering and emotional difficulties experienced by the mothers and their children. As a result, the less attention has been paid to the views from other actors within or beyond transnational family. For example, we know little about the emotional changes of the fathers left behind by migration mothers, and various carers carers of the migrant children, such as grandparents. Secondly, the impacts of the family separation, both on mothers and the children, have been investigated by scholars in different academic disciplines. But due to their focus on the global migration or south-north migration, less attention has been paid to the translocal families created by south-south migration or internal migration. Finally, most of the literature on the transnational parenthood has focused mainly on the migrant lives in the receiving societies. While it is no doubt that their lives in their destination is important to understand the nature of the transnational family, very few Western country-based migration scholars has conducted the extensive research in the origin societies. If we consider that many migrants have sustained translocal ties even after their periods of migration prolonged, and that origin societies have been the important point of the social reference for these migrants, it is apparent that we needed to pay more attention to the social context in the sending society. Next slide, please. So if we keep in our mind these remaining issues about the transnational family, we can find many interesting and important articles in the Asian Families and Intimacies. Of course, we have many work in our collection that shed light on the historical formation of the family in the respective societies and the varieties. In this short presentations, I would like to focus on the two articles that directly argued the impacts of the parents or mothers' migration to families. I first take a look at an article from Thailand, Growing Up Apart from Parents. This article is included in the volume 4, chapter 43, drawing on the interviews in the rural Thailand. The author focused on the views of the grandparents as carers of migrant children. In the village studied, many children of migrants are taken care of by relatives, particularly grandparents. One grandparent of the migrant children mentioned, "This is very normal." However, unlike the transnational households that sent members to the affluent countries in the global north, many of the carers cannot expect monetary benefit through such childcare arrangement. Although the author did not elaborate on the destinations of the migrant parents, based on this information, I suppose that many of them are migrating to the urban areas in Thailand. What the author found through the interviews is a grandparent's sense of affection and concern for their own grandchildren. 60-year-old woman taking care of the grandchildren mentioned that if their parents come to collect them, I think I would definitely miss them. The author further argued that while such childcare arrangement brought some challenges to the grandparents' lives, such as financial burdens and the decrease of their time for their social commitment in the community, these grandparents consider the arrangement as more positive option than living with their migrant parents, because they believe their parents do not have time to take good care of their children in their destinations. From this article, we could learn a lot about the views of the carers of the migrant children, characteristic of such arrangement caused by the internal migration. Next, please. Another article I would like to introduce is Remaking Masculinity by Alicia Pingle, the chapter 53, originally published in 2001. Drawing on her fieldwork in the northern Philippines, she addressed the question, what happened to the men's identities when their wives went overseas and became the main providers? In her research site in the Philippines, local notion of the masculinity evolves around being good providers, virile sex partners, and responsible fathers. But due to the demand of the female migrant labor in the global north or neighboring East Asian countries, they cannot be the main providers and they live apart from their partners. In such context, she focused on their definition of the masculine identity. Although I cannot explain her analysis in detail, her conclusion is that starting to emerge are varied masculinities, that is the plural. Some men remain guided by the traditional masculine code, some break away from it in keeping their new roles. In short, they are making a choice under the constraints caused by the feminization of the international migration. Next, please. Aside from the conclusions, we could find plenty of the interesting findings. For example, she elaborated on the power dynamics between these husbands, migrant wives, and the relatives. She touched on the emerging phenomena such as surveillance by their mothers-in-law, who see these men as inadequate providers. Sorry, there is a mistype. Aside from her conclusions, we could find, another important analysis is that one, with the elevated social status of the migrant wives in the sending societies and the husband uneasiness about the changing status of their migrant wives and the new behavior of their wives after migration. She stated that coming from another country and becoming dollar earners, they acquire higher status, hence invitations become frequent. But in many cases, she observed husband decline invitation to social event. We wonder how such feelings of uneasiness of the husbands affected the husband's behavior in other sphere of the family and their masculine identities. Next, please. She also made analysis of the issues of sexuality between these long-distance couples, which are largely unexplored in the literature. She argued how these men have responded to the threat to the power of the husband as master of the sexuality by taking concrete examples. The case where a man, for example, who were deserted by his migrant wife, tried to retrieve his manhood by becoming a devoted provider and then a disciplined father after starting to live with his new partner. That example is particularly interesting. Also, what she pointed out was the issue of the class in their sexualities. Her assertion that sexual fulfillment becomes a luxury for the working class is considered the hidden consequence of the development of the global care chains, about which we know very little. Next slide, please. Thank you. In these presentations, I introduced only 2 articles that touched on the issues of the migration and family. But I suggest that these articles show one way we use the Asian families and intimacy. That is, the article in the volumes allow us to reconsider the ways of questioning the family. In the case of this presentation, the questioning a transnational family. The article examines the intricacies of the migrant translocal lives, both articles dealt with the multiplicities of the views on the family and the family practices in different spheres and their interrelationships. They also explored the multiple positionings of the migrants, both in and receiving societies, and their effects on the family and gender relations. Both issues are largely unexplored in the existing literature at its time, and to a lesser extent, even at the moment. If we could expand this argument according to my personal research interest, these articles suggested the need of a more relational approach to the transnational family and family practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Nagasaka. Next presenter is me. So may I start? I will talk about care and Asian familialism reconsidered. Next slide, please. Next one, please. I volunteered to be the editor of the part on care because I was irritated by the papers that start from these kind of sentences. The care needs of the elderly, sick, or disabled, as well as children, were traditionally met within the family. Within the family, it was mostly female family members who provided care. And if that paper is about Asia, the authors usually added, particularly in Asia. I doubted this kind of statement. So I want to collect the articles writing about care in Asia and question Asian familialism. And I also wanted to see the concepts of care and familial care referring to the same thing or in different cultural and historical contexts. Next, please. The care part has 10 chapters. 2 are on history and 5 are about familial care and 3 are on non-familial care in contemporary Asia. We have very limited number of historical papers, and both of them are on Japan because the historical study of caregiving, well, kind of social history, is not so well developed in many countries. Next, please. I'm going to talk about 2 chapters among them. The first one is chapter 38, Birth and Child Care in Early Modern Japan. So this is a historical study. It's about caring men in Japanese history. Maybe you remember the talk by Patricia Uberoy and Tanette Wonyanova about Japanese men's homosexuality, which contradict the idea of Japanese masculine man in the history. Maybe this one is another example. The author, Mashita Machiko, uses a samurai father's diary from the 19th century to show how his fathering was warm and loving. Fathers provided care that could be termed motherly in its physical, emotional, and intimate nature. It's also interesting that this was permitted by their workplace. we don't see strict divisions between the public and private spheres. And samurai were also allowed to take care leaves from for their old parents. This is written by another author. Next, please. Shall we look at the part of the diary from that samurai father? He was writing like this. I left at about 4 in the afternoon for night duty. Roku, the name of the daughter. Roku came along after 6 with her pillow, and a little while later, after warming her futon, I put her to sleep before me. After 11 or so, I took her to the toilet and then went to bed with her in my arms. It was very cold tonight, so we snuggled up to each other and slept well. How sweet. At about 1, she woke up to use the toilet. After acquiring smallpox, the frequency of using the toilet increased, so I was very worried. She might wet herself in the office. So this is an example of motherly kind of care by samurai father. Next, please. And we also have the testimonies by European visitors to Japan before and after Meiji Restoration. They remarked on how Japanese men, from physical laborers to samurai, were very indulgent with their children. They expressed surprise at the fact that the fathers didn't beat their children, as was common practice in Europe at the time. Next, please. So these are the pictures of samurai fathers and laborer fathers at the end of Tokugawa period. So there are so many men who are taking care of their kids in the street too. So the idea that care was the domain of women was established after the Meiji Restoration, when the division of the spheres began as Japan, when the division of the spheres began as Japan started modernization, in other words, westernization. The fact that the feminization of care work started in the modern era is evident in Japan. Next, please. The second chapter I want to talk about is the Tagasalo or Mananalo syndrome, written by a Filipino author. It's about elder sister's responsibility. This chapter on the Philippines reverses the preconception that familial care is intergenerational, from parents to child or from child to parent. Elder sisters have a heavy responsibility in caring for their younger siblings, as well as economically supporting the family. On the other hand, elder sisters suffer psychologically from the pressures of the burdens. Next, please. Societies where elder sisters have a heavy responsibility are widely found in Southeast Asia and Oceania. Okinawa, now a part of Japan, is another society of this kind. Sisters are considered to be guardian angels spiritually. Children without elder sisters may treat girls in the neighborhood as allo sisters because it was really necessary to have elder sister to take care of you. Japan historically transformed from a society where this type of sibling was the basic unit to the one where the husband and wife are. As I said in my first presentation, Japan belonged to the Southeast Asian tradition, bilateral kinship structure and strong ties between siblings. But Japan transformed from this type of society to a different one, partially by the influence from China and later by modernization. Next, please. And non-parental care of children is found in Asia, past and present. In addition to, the care by elder sister is not the only example. Another example of non-parental care is employment of domestic workers. This is a photo from Japan, 100 years ago, and another one is from Taiwan, 10 years ago. So commodification of care is not new at all. Next, please. And there are more examples of non-parental care of children in Asia. Another one is skipped generation household. Without the middle generation, the parents' generation. This is found in the houses of migrant workers in Thailand, Myanmar, but the Philippines and China, but also in Chinese cities. So in the Chinese cities, even the families which are sending out migrant workers are doing this. So grandparents receive economic compensation from their children sometimes. And another example of non-parental care is by temples in Thailand and Japan. And charity institutions existed in late Qing China. So there were various kinds of non-parental care of children. Next, please. So this is the summary. Asian familialism is a myth in history and about contemporary Asia. These two diagrams show you the various kinds of care given by different sectors, including the state, market, community, family, and kin in the past and now. So as you see, Asian people are receiving care from various sectors. So, so Asian familialism is a myth. So thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation. Then the next speaker is Professor Ho Yang-Fan from Fudan University. He will talk about family in China from tradition to modern and postmodern.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Hello, Emiko. Yeah, long time to see you. Yeah. I will show my screen. Yes. Hello, everyone. Chinese editor was supposed to be respect and a very important role in the family in the past time. In Chinese culture, elders are viewed as a source of wisdom and spirituality because it is a culture society. And they are respected to extend that the questioning their authority is considered offensive. In traditional Chinese houses, altars are made for decreased elders to order to remember them. Even after departing from the world, they are supposed to be guiding force in spirit. Middle generation parents as provides, parents or working age adults too had a very important part to play in the family as a provider for all, while the elders were always to the controlling and of reasons of respect. A next generation married and had children as young as possible, and then worked as hard as possible to provide both their parents and the children. It's a very common sense about Chinese family, traditional family. Children as a future investments. Children has no authority of their own life, and the decision were always made for them. Youngest were always at the receiving end of family decisions, including his couples, who is their couples. They were rigorously trained and prepared to serve their elders. Men and women, patriarchal influence on family. In addition to being patriarchal, Chinese society is patrilineal. Therefore, even after marrying into a household, women are seen as outsiders. In Chinese family, every relation has a different name. The name for family members on the material side began with Y, meaning outside. It's how to say is grandparents. Grandparents is father's parents is just the grandparents. In China, is mother's parents is Y grandparents is outside. Women's role in the family was first as a child bearers, then as homemakers and workers, always subservient to the man of the house. How changing in China are affecting family values. Children are not just raised by parents, but often 2 or 4 grandparents too. Usually first parental grandparents. Chinese people often end up making important life decisions just because of pressures from their elders, especially is the younger generation's marriage. 6 voices. 6 voices. Do you mean why is the 6 voices? Parents 2 voices and grandparents. Grandparents is 4 voices, including 6 voices for child to buy apartment in the big city, such as Beijing, Shanghai, Canton. The one-child policy changes the Chinese society. After implementation of one-child policy from 1979 to 2015, Chinese society faced some major social imbalance. Since in China a male child is responsible for the continuation of the family. This restriction results in too much pressures on single male child, which consequently lead to what's known as the Little Emperor, 小皇帝. In present times, norms of respect of elders are also changing dramatically, so much so that elders may now even be facing a complete lack of respect from youngest, as they march towards the more individualistic society, especially in the 39 and in the outside in the big city, is the youngest is migrant into the big city. So it's just left the elders in the countryside. The Chinese Dinka family, double income, no kids, couples no longer marry only for constitution of their lineage. Now has become the center of the marriage. Despite reluctant parents, couples can now choose not to have kids, only focus on their career and their quality of their life, especially in big cities. While some couples choose not to have so many kids in order to avoid the financial burden of raising children, just like in Japan. Others avoid to rebel against its traditional ways. It's a pyramid of Chinese age. It's very typical. It became is elder society. In the near future, is 20 years, Chinese aging problem is very serious. Very serious. So Chinese government have changed the one policy child, one child policy. Now it's 3-child policy. The policy was announced on just is 5 months ago, which comes after the release of results of the 7th National Population Census. It shocked the government, which showed the number of births in mainland China in 2020 was only 12 million, the lowest number of the births since 1960s. And further aging of the population against which the policy was born. But just let me see what's the consequence. So now in Chinese society, is the 剩女 is a big problem. 剩女 is not a very good good phenomenon. It's in some media, is 3S women, single 70s, born in 70s, stuck. The increasing popularity of women in China has been largely accredited to the growing educated middle class. Women are more free and able to live independently in comparison to previous generations. Is the parents. Now in China, is some census shows is 38 million in China, 剩女, nearly 1 million in Beijing. I don't know is how many in Shanghai, but it's not less in Beijing. I think. So Chinese 3-child policy. How to change the Chinese society? I don't know. I'm just very curious. So in nearly 100 years, Chinese family and society is changed very dramatically. But the Chinese government plays a very important role. One-child policy changed the Chinese very greatly. But now 3-children's policy, how to change the China? I don't know. But maybe we will focus on the future problem. Thank you, everywhere. And it's marriage and divorce. It's a big problem. From 2013 to 2020, the numbers of registered marriage pairs continued to decline from 13.47 million to 8 million, with 21.2% year-on-year decline in 2020. The crude marriage rate fell from the 9.9 per thousand to 6.6 per thousand. 24 to 29 years old to replace the 20 to 24 year olds as a nearly main force of marriage. The high age group above the 40 years, marriage registration accounts for significant increase. From 1987 to 2020, the number of registered divorce pairs in China climbed from 520,000 to 3.73 million. From 1987 to 2019, the crude divorce rate climbed from 0.5 per thousand to 30.4 per thousand. Thank you, everyone. I'm just introduced now I'm focusing on the Chinese family problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ho. Then we have finished all the presentations. So now it is time for discussions and question and answers. We have many questions in the chat box. Is it also visible for others, for other paper givers?
Yes, it can be seen.
Can you?
Yes, it can be seen.
So
I think it's good to read it aloud so everybody can hear the question, Professor Enrico.
So may I ask the paper givers to look at the chat box and find the questions for you and prepare your answers. And meanwhile, may I ask Professor Uma Chakravarti? I see her name in the audience, one of the authors of the chapters in the books. May I ask Professor Chakravarti to speak something, if you don't mind? Yeah, we have a great chapter by her on patriarchy in India. Is it possible to demute her, Patty? Professor Uma Chakravarti. And I'm going to share the discussion part with Professor Uberoy. Patricia, is Uma still in the audience?
Yes, we have asked her to unmute.
Great. And please send your questions to the chat box. Yeah, I'm asking the audience.
Maybe I can, Professor Emiko, maybe I can read some of the questions.
Yeah.
Okay. So there is this question from Song Namcho. I think this is either for you, Professor Emiko, or for I think this is for you, Professor Emiko. So this is a question from Song Namcho. Acknowledging Asian intellectual heritage and Asian studies as global knowledge and new paradigm to explain Asian society better is wonderful and important efforts, but explaining modern Asian societies consisting with different generations of people whose culture and education are influenced by the West, it might be limited with Asian model to explain social interactions and culture of Asian society with coexistence of the young and the old with different experiences and histories of Western and Asian civilization. Is the Asian model, can the Asian model be an alternative of Western knowledge intellectual system to change our paradigm? That's the question.
Okay, so then may I answer to the question while others are reading the questions, and Professor Chakrabarti is preparing for speaking. I'm not I'm not telling Asian way of thinking will replace a Western way of thinking. But what I want to promote is, Asian, what to say? Asians to communicate with other Asians directly, and to learn what kind of toolbox they have. We have intellectual toolboxes, and we have various concepts in it. Some are from our own society, and some are from other civilizations, for example, Chinese or Indian, and we also have modern concepts in it. So we cannot take away our Western concepts from our intellectual toolbox, because they are already our parts in this indispensable or part of our intellectual self. But I am proposing that we should learn from other Asians' way of connecting these various concepts in their own ways, and try to find a new way or more effective way to combine these concepts to understand ourselves and the world. I hope it's, I made sense for you. Okay, then other questions?
There's another question from Lamberto Pilatan. This is for Professor Nguyen. So the question is for Professor Nguyen, what are reasons for the marriage in Vietnam? Further, what are the factors that lead to the changes in marriage patterns in Vietnam and other Asian countries based on your study?
A question to Gwen Hu Min.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So for the first, I saw 3 questions for myself. So that is very good. And thank you for your interest in my presentation. So here the first question related to the meaning of marriage. So that is in Vietnam, the marriage in Vietnam. So I can say that in Vietnam now, even though the people, that is there is a change from the family value to individual happiness value when getting married. However, family significant, family value is still very significant. That means, for example, when we ask people about the reason why married, that is more than 50% said that is a very recent survey. That is a very large survey in Vietnam. That is more than 50% said that is because of love. That is we mean for individual happiness value. And also about like 50% still consider that is they marry because as everybody marry, that is like just follow the tradition. And also a lot of people, that is they marry because they want to find a person who care for their family. So that is more like a family matter than like an individual matter. And like they also want to marry because they want to have like the emotion base for them during the difficult. And also 1/4 of people, they also want to marry because they want to have children. We consider this like traditional reason. So in general, I can see that like the value of marriage, it changed from family matter to individual, but still very slowly. And now the reason for family still counts for very large like a portion for the reason of marriage. So that is like the reason for marriage in Vietnam. For another thing, you mentioned about like what are the factors of changing the marriage pattern in Vietnam and also in Asia. So I can see say that like there are like a lot of reason of that. That is, for example, like from different framework. That is, she mentioned about like availability, desirability, feasibility. That means, for example, like the people they want to marry. That is desire of like the society. For example, like I just mentioned in Vietnam now, in general, the people still want to marry because like they want to follow the traditional one, or maybe like feasibility. That is because if they want to marry, they have to prepare like in advance, like the house or other material base for them, or like some other factor. If we base on like modernization theory, for example, like the education increase. When education increase, their thinking about the marriage and love also like a change, or like an urbanization at the same impact of education. People live in urban area, they also have a more open thinking about the marriage pattern. And also for like if they work I mean for example, another thing from cultural approach, that is based on like traditional meaning of marriage, like I just mentioned in Vietnam. In general, the people in Vietnam, they can find out their significance of their life just through marriage. So that is very important, that they need to follow like everybody marry, I also should marry. So that is a cultural tradition. And also in empirical study, we also can talk about like some traditional indicator or variable. For example, like a birth order. Usually in Vietnam or in some East Asian country, that is the first person or the eldest child son, that is have a very important to the family. So they need to get married earlier, so that they just fulfill their responsibility to have the children to continue like the lineage of there. And also for example, like in people in married by like arranged by their parents, they also should marry earlier, for example, like that. So that is a cultural approach. And also especially
Professor Lin,
yes.
thank you very much for your detailed answer. Is it okay to stop?
You mean to make shorter?
Yeah.
Okay, I make shorter. So I just want to say something very briefly more. That is like when we talk about, especially for the case of Vietnam and China. In Vietnam, that is the impact of the wartime. And in China and in Vietnam, that is the impact of like the government policy. I think the presentation of Professor Hua Ang Fang also mentioned about that. And like some literature from my study also mentioned about that. Okay, so that is a very brief, and if you want to find out more, you can try email to me. Okay, thank you very much. And do I need to answer another question?
May I ask others to answer before your second answer?
There's another question for Professor Min from.
Excuse me. May I ask Professor Uma Chakravarti to speak something? Are you ready to speak? No?
Uma has already been made co-host, so they can unmute anytime.
Can you hear me, Professor Chakravarti? Okay, then later. So I think the paper givers had enough time to look at the chat box, and there are questions to Professor Nagasaka and Professor Ho in the chat box, and a few more questions to Professor Ming and myself. Can I ask Professor Nagasaka to answer the question for you?
Yes, thank you. Can I see?
May I read the question?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. This is from Lamberto Pilatan. Good afternoon, Nagasaka Sensei. In the Philippines, the house husbands phenomena are very common. This happens if their wives go abroad or overseas for work and earn bigger amount of money for family's welfare. Sensei, is this house husband setup also present in Japan or in Hiroshima particularly, and why?
Oh, thank you very much for your very interesting question. In other societies, the same phenomena that we can observe or not is really the important question we should address. And perhaps in the case of Japan, the number of such a phenomenon is, I think, smaller. This is simply because international migration of the mothers is perhaps much less common in Japan than in the Philippines. So perhaps this kind of the setup of the household is not very common in Japan, or I'm not sure about the situation in the other countries, in the Thailand or the Indonesia or India. But as far as I'm concerned, in Japan, so in the case of Japan, the number is smaller. What I want to add regarding this question is when I did my fieldwork in the Philippines during the 1990s and 2000s, I was surprised by the fact that many men become, the low income class households. The many men become house husbands when their wives went out from the for earning opportunity for income generating activities, and I was surprised by the skill of the household work of these men, And I grew up in Japan in the 1970s and the 1980s. This is bit surprise to me to observe that many house husbands in the rural Philippines during that time. So Alicia Pingol, the author of that article I introduced in my presentation, that she didn't elaborate on this point because that is perhaps the normal for her. So I think dialogue between the Asian scholars is important and has a possibility if we consider the differences between our societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Nagasaka. And then may I ask Professor Ho to answer the questions you have? May I ask Patty to read the answer to Professor Ho?
Okay. The question for Professor Ho: what are the reasons for the decline in marriage and the increase in the rate of divorce in China? This is a question for Professor Ho.
Professor Ho, could you answer? Professor Ho, can you hear me? Maybe not. In that case, let me answer the question from Professor Dan Ang from Vietnam. He's asking about the difference between Northern Vietnam and Southern Vietnam. And she says the influence from China is stronger in the Northern Vietnam, but not so strong in the Southern Vietnam. Yeah, that is quite true. We have two chapters from Vietnam. One by Professor Hu says the influence from China is so strong. So the tradition of Vietnam is Confucianism. But another one, Professor Do Tai Don's chapter is different. He focuses on Southern Vietnam, and he shows the customs in Southern Vietnam, which are quite different from Confucian one. So, as you say, Professor Southern Vietnam is closer to Southeast Asia, or if referring to my framework I showed at the beginning of the session, Southern Vietnam still have the characteristics of bilateral societies in Southeast Asia clearer even now. Did I? Okay. So so the difference between Northern and Southern Vietnam is a good example of the effects of civilizations. The civilizations covered bilateral areas, but their influences are different. Some are deep and some are not so deep, shallow. So Northern Vietnam and Southern Vietnam is a good example. And Korea and Japan is another good example. Korea developed patrilineal kinship system under the influence of Neo-Confucianism in Joseon Dynasty period. But Japan never developed patrilineal system, a genuine patrilineal system. We have something we can call pseudo patrilineal system, but actually that is quite gender equal. This is my answer to Professor Ang. Is Professor Ho back?
I think Professor Ho lost his connection as he is not anymore in the Zoom room.
Okay, so then Professor Uma Chakravarti is now available. So may I ask you, Patty, to unmute her? Professor Chakravarti, it would be really great. Thank you very much for joining us.
I've been around. I've been listening to it. I've been around and listening to you. So I will just make a few comments based on the my experience of writing the paper that you all included in your collection. I won't take too long. How many minutes shall I have? How many minutes do you give me?
5
minutes. 5 minutes? Yeah, that's good. That's good. Excellent. So I've been listening to the papers, and you can see that there's a rich array of scholars from all over Asia doing their analysis of issues around gender patriarchy, sexualities, and so on. So that's it's a very positive and happy situation, because although we have had many links, we have not been able to actually present our arguments or present our understanding to each other as much as we should. And as somebody pointed, as perhaps one of the scholars pointed out, that is, we talk via Europe. And I think that's the starting point of what I want to say in how I worked on a piece of writing that I did. It was really about the fact that although we had, after the women's movement, we had begun to focus on gender inequality, and we had begun to focus on, we had begun to use the term patriarchy. We had transformed the meaning of the term from its anthropological roots. We still did not actually have a body of theoretical arguments with which we could ground the fact that patriarchies did not work in the same way across the globe, and that Asia had its own dynamic, and it went beyond the way in which, historically gender inequality had been presented. I mean, it would be, say, for instance, foot binding in China and parda in South Asia, or parda in other, that is the veiling practices. So in a sense, I think the organic relationship between gender inequality and other forms of inequality in different parts of Asia, and I think across the world, is not something that was factored in. So my paper, the paper that you, Patricia, chose to put into this volume was born out of that kind of concern. There was a way in which we did not look at the institution of patriarchy as it worked in South Asia. So that was the attempt that I tried to do. But it also meant that I wanted to go beyond a mechanical understanding of gender inequality, that is the power of men over women. I also wanted to look at how the structures of inequality were enmeshed together. They were locked together in a specific formation, which resulted in a peculiar and intense form of sort of handling of, sociological factors and historical factors and so on. So I was particularly concerned about the way in which caste, which was unique to South Asia and perhaps did not exist across the world, and patriarchy, that is inequality between men and women, were locked together in a single formation. And it was that attempt. See, I did nothing original. I took my arguments from existing writing. I did not do anthropological fieldwork-based material. I looked at history and I tried to formulate a relationship between the complex way in which patriarchy works. So it is not simply the power of men over women. It is backed by the state. It is backed by, it's linked up to both class and caste, because caste is that peculiar thing that we have in South Asia. So that's what I tried to do in this piece of writing. And sexuality, of course, was at the heart, because control, it was represented in some ways as the hysterical fixation around endogamy. That is a structure of marriage in which you can only marry within certain boundaries and you must marry outside of certain boundaries. Now, many communities are exogamous, but what was unique to South Asia is this obsession with keeping marriage within certain bounded groups, and that was related to the manner in which caste was reproduced over centuries. So communities needed to marry within themselves. So the Brahmins had to marry Brahmins. Other communities had to marry within themselves. And since these communities were actually arranged in a hierarchical formation, through endogamy, you reproduce the entire grid of the map of inequality, not only for that time, but into the future. So in a sense, you locked that system of inequality together in such a complex manner that first it was difficult to see the way it worked, and then it was difficult to untangle. So even today, I will just briefly tell you that that actually the biggest problem today is to sustain that form of marriage. And however modern you are, many types of attempts, leakages have happened, but the structure of marriage remains heavily tied to endogamy. And parents ensure the marriage of their children because they keep that endogamous group going. And if young couples, for instance, decide to take matters into their own hands and want to marry across these endogamous groups, particularly if the woman is of a higher status, there is an amazing amount of violence that is tied to it, because they can see that structure of inequality itself will begin to be impacted if that pattern continues across a few generations. So you'll see that there's a lot of violence around marriages which are self-arranged by young couples, particularly if the woman is of a higher status. And that is what I gave that is what led to me describing the whole pattern as Brahmanical patriarchy, because it not only impacted the Brahmins, but it impacted everybody down the line. Every community down the line practiced that same form of marriage, and in a sense bounded themselves, locked themselves into that system, which kept being reproduced over centuries. And the state was a full backer of it, historically, at least the traditional Indian state. So that's what I tried to do. It was an attempt to try and say, look, patriarchies are a very complex phenomenon. You cannot reduce it to a single axis. And it's not about who opens the door, what kind of chivalrous codes you have. Essentially, the power of men over women, and the control over sexuality is a critical factor, but it is also culturally and regionally articulated in very, very different and complex ways. So that was the attempt at writing that paper. So that's what I have to say.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Chakravarti. I really admire your contribution to the understanding of Indian patriarchy. I was quite convinced by your chapter, and I tried to find a comparable one about East Asian patriarchy, but I couldn't. So maybe such kind of work has to be done about other part of the world. But at the same time, I think the structures, well, the structures of the patriarchy in India is particularly strong and clear. That might be the reason of the persistence of patriarchy in Southeast Asia. I have more comments to share with you, but because the end of the session is approaching, may I ask the authors of the chapters who are present here to show your face at least? Professor Tanai, Dr. Tanai, and is Professor Yang still here? Professor Yang Huna. Yeah, we have some authors in the audience. May I ask you to show your faces? Is Tanai here? And Professor Yang Huna? I just think people want to see your face. This is a rare occasion. Thank you very much, Mr. Tanai. Nice to see you. Do you have a few words to share? No?
I'm very proud to engage in this project, and I try to nice to meet you all in the area of family and society in this Asia. I try to make this my topic about surname in continuity.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really learned a lot from his chapter on the invention of surnames, patrilineal surnames in bilateral Thailand, because the same thing happened in Japan. We are in bilateral societies, but modernity, not old modernization, not old civilization, but modernity brought us the patrilineality, pseudo-patrilineality. So I think this is an important topic to be investigated in the near future. So this is very different type of patriarchy from patrilineal societies. Okay, so may I ask Dr. Componsano from the University of the Philippines to deliver the concluding remarks?
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Emiko. Thank you to the authors for giving me this opportunity to be part of your fascinating panel. I find the range of perspectives that have been brought together in these volumes quite impressive. But you know, the range can also be a bit disorienting or disorientating. So you know, if you don't mind, I would like to engage this panel by falling back on my own interests, which is in fact part of one of the themes tackled by this panel, and it is really on transgressive processes and the complex role of state formation, modernization, modernity, and of course globalization and migration. As you know, my interest is on the transnationalization of the householding process in the Philippines as a result of migration. And really, this panel really speaks to my interest. So I would like to pick things up from there. You know, really one of the things that need to be done, I think, and this is why I find this panel quite fascinating, is that, you know, there is a need for the theoretical sweep of Western sociology or sociological theorizing, I think, to be nuanced by more grounded theorizing, and of course to be interrogated by more emic views from the different communities in Asia and of course Southeast Asia and East Asia. That's why I like this panel, because I think, you know, your emphasis on the quotidian, on everyday life, on family, on intimacies, really had that effect of interrogating these very dominant Western theories, and as you know, the effect of many of these theories, and they're quite impressive and sophisticated, but the tendency always is, because of the sheer sweep of this theorizing, the analysis tends to be flat. And I think your contribution is that it's really nuanced, that analysis, and I think it has created an opportunity for Asian academics to participate in knowledge production. So thank you for that, and I feel that you know, you've created really, you've paved the way for these kinds of movements to happen. So this collaboration is really quite important. So again, thank you for bringing together these different perspectives, and on that hopeful note, I bring this panel to a close. So thank you very much, everyone.